Bitcoin and gold is Alan Hibbard, precious metals and alternative money strategist at GoldSilver.com. So good morning, Alan, and thank you so much for joining me. What is your reaction to Powell's comments regarding Bitcoin and that comparison to gold? And what does it say about how far Bitcoin has come in terms of adoption here in the U.S.?
Yeah, hi, Remy. Well, thanks for having me. This is one of the rare cases where I actually agree with Fed Chair Powell. I think he's right that Bitcoin is sort of a competitor to gold. It's not so much a competitor to the dollar or really to any other currency. And so there's a lot of talk that Bitcoin is supposed to be a currency that you can use to buy a cup of coffee. That is never going to happen, just like it's never going to happen that we use gold to buy a cup of coffee. Maybe we get derivatives, we get promises to pay Bitcoin or promises to pay gold to buy a cup of coffee. But those would be the currency, not the underlying asset itself. So Bitcoin is akin to gold. It is sound money. It is a store of value. And for that reason, it is going to be hodled in private vaults. It is going to be hodled and it's not going to circulate. So yeah, Bitcoin is absolutely being adopted as a store of value, just like gold. We're not going to see them circulate throughout the economy. They're going to be saved. And the thing that circulates is going to be dollars and other fiat currencies.
Yeah, and Alan, when we take a step back and look at 2024, it has been quite the year for crypto here in the U.S. We saw the launch of spot Bitcoin as well as ETH ETFs. So when we're talking about portfolio allocation for retail investors, tell us what the case is, and what about in terms of access, especially given the fact that Bitcoin is at elevated levels. It has seen a year-to-date gain of over 100% this year.
Yeah, it's an important question. It's one that just about everyone is thinking about. Like, do I buy the physical asset? Do I buy an ETF? Or has it reached a peak and should I sell? Right. So these are all important questions. But I think if you understand the value proposition of what Bitcoin is and really what gold is, you realize that they have nowhere to go but up. So what you probably want to start with is owning the physical asset of whichever one you choose. And you're going to have to think about which allocation to Bitcoin and gold makes sense to you. And after you take that allocation, then maybe you want additional price exposure through an ETF because it's certainly easier to get in and out. And you can hold it in different kinds of accounts. If you already have a brokerage account, it's obviously very easy to hold an ETF, whereas it's impossible to hold the physical asset in the case of gold or Bitcoin. So really, it's going to depend on the investor. But I think an allocation to physical, and is a good place to start. And that means holding your private keys in the case of Bitcoin. And then probably you want to supplement that with ETFs or these paper products, which may or may not be leveraged. That's usually a secondary play.
And of course, the countdown is on to 2025 and also to January 20th. So in this post-election environment here in the U.S., there have been question marks in terms of what will actually transpire in January. So when we're talking about legislation introduced at the state level, as well as what Trump will actually bring forward in terms of strategic reserve plans for Bitcoin, give us your take on this. And I'm also curious about this understanding that perhaps Bitcoin could be stored right next to gold in government buildings. What are we talking about, since this isn't quite a physical asset like gold is?
Yeah, well, certainly just the idea of floating a national strategic Bitcoin reserve is pretty compelling in the case of thinking about Bitcoin as digital gold. So whoever's putting that forward, obviously we know who the people are, but whoever's putting that forward is certainly endorsing Bitcoin as a form of digital gold. And in the proposal that we've seen from Senator Lummis, the proposal is to hold that Bitcoin for 20 years and not sell it. So that's clearly a long-term store of value. That's not a day-to-day currency that's going to be moved or traded in the short term. So absolutely, that's another data point that sort of reinforces that store of value hypothesis. And in terms of storing Bitcoin in the same building as gold, that may happen, it may not happen. And to your point, obviously, Bitcoin is purely digital. So it does have its own set of security risks. And certainly I wouldn't want my own government to be lazy and sloppy and assume that a physical vault is enough for digital protection, because, of course, they're different. But it may make sense if you already have staff in a certain building to co-locate. That could just be a matter of convenience. But of course, there are all kinds of security measures you want to take when you custody your private keys. whether you're going to have a multi-signature wallet, or there's a whole host of concerns you got to think through. And I don't really know what the government's going to do in that sense, but I trust they'll get the right people involved and make a good decision for the country. So I'm optimistic.
Okay, Alan. Well, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for sharing your perspective with our viewing audience. Happy holidays.
Thanks, Remy. Happy holidays.